Welcome to FinSherpa. I hope you're enjoying all the videos we're putting out for you. It's all for you and all on matters relating to money. I'm sure it's rewarding. Today we're going to cover a book review, a very interesting book that I read recently. This is a book that is called Same as Ever. This is by this world-famous best-selling author, Morgan Housel. Now, Morgan Housel is very famous for his first book which he wrote, which is called The Psychology of Money. Now, if you have not read Psychology of Money, my advice to you is please invest in it. You will be rich after you read it in more ways than one. Now, Psychology of Money is a seminal book. We have already covered it in our video earlier as well, so look out for it. But today I'm going to talk about his next book, which is Same as Ever. The title itself is very, very enticing. But before I get there, I want to talk a bit about Morgan Housel. Morgan Housel is a fund manager. He runs a fund in the US called the Collaborative Fund, and he's a partner there. Apart from that, he is a prolific writer. He writes in the Washington Post. He used to contribute in Motley Fool's. He has written 2 books, like I mentioned, The Psychology of Money, which is a world bestseller of sorts, and now the Same as Ever book as well. The beauty of Morgan's writing is the simplicity. You can be a 10-year-old, open the book and still understand what he's talking about. He doesn't use jargons. He uses simple words to convey complex messages and emotional messages. Most of the time, I found him to be approaching the behavior side of human beings rather than numbers and stuff like that. So he makes it captivating. And apart from that, he writes with stories to back his theory. So it's even more ultra interesting. Now, Same as Ever. Now, in the world where everything is changing at the speed at which you blink your eye, you have AI, machine learning, everything turning everything upside down. There is a whiff of fresh air, this book coming out to say that not everything is changing. There are lots of stuff out there which are not changing at all. Can you step back from all the noise and look at what are all those things that are never changing? And therefore, you can make a better judgment, is what this book is all about. And it's a very, very interesting book. This book is divided into 23 chapters, each chapter conveying a certain message through a story or an episode or an incident that is very interesting for easy to people to relate. I'm going to talk about 4 stories just to give you a glimpse of what Morgan meant when he wrote about Same as Ever. The first story talks about calm is the foundation of crazy, is what he writes. And he says the good times are the foundation for bad times, and bad times are actually the foundation for good times. And it's ironical that if you look at our own very own stock markets, it follows the same pattern. We know that in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the Y2K boom meant that a lot of stock prices of IT companies went through the roof. That was also the time when the next crash was born. September 2001, when the Twin Tower blast happened, all these stocks crashed. There was a big IT tech meltdown that happened at that point in time. Now that's where the next optimism is born, or next seeds of the next big bull run was formed. From 2001, when the markets hit an all-time low, it went all the way to 2008 when it went almost about 10x the markets grew in those 7 years in between. That's the kind of growth. So he says it's important to keep understanding that at the peak of glory is when the seeds of the next big fall is there, and at the lowest point of economics is where the next big boom is going to be formed. So you need to have this in mind. As they say, it's not over until it's over, right? He also talks about too much, too soon, too fast. anything that comes with steroids is likely to have a bad ending. Now, we live in an era of startup world where people are expecting multiplicity of things turning around overnight, especially people who are funding some of these ventures expect results in double quick time. And many a times we are witnessing to the fact that these cannot be done in the normal course. So sometimes some of the promoters take an easy way out, fudge books of accounts, which then gets discovered, or sometimes they fall back and therefore they themselves get replaced in the whole process. So he says, rationalize your expectation. Keep it sustainable. Sustainable is better than speed, is what he kind of looks at. And that's the way to go in terms of keeping things at a solid fare. Third story, Illation and Despair. And I think it's a beautiful concept of marrying optimism and pessimism. There are people who are constantly optimistic. They have a certain level of success. And there are people who are constantly pessimistic and they have some rationality in what they do. But the reality, he says, is that you need to marry optimism and pessimism. And he tells this beautiful story. Admiral Stockdale, who was the Vietnam prisoner of war, one of the highest ranking American military personnel who was captured on the 8th day of the Vietnam War and released after 8 years when the war got ended. So for 8 years, he suffered torture, humiliation, and inhuman treatment in Vietnam, yet survived. And at a later date, in an interview, when a reporter asked him, "How did you survive?" he said, "I was optimistic to believe that one day I will see my family, but I also was a realist to understand that tomorrow morning 6 a.m. I will undergo again an 8 hours of torture." So Morgan beautifully says that you need to marry optimism and pessimism in a certain combination as per the situation for you to get a winning example. Last but not the least is he talks that risk is something that you don't see coming. Very ironical. As late as February of 2020, we know corporates which were putting plans for 2020, 21, 22 and having big jamboree employee events and so on and so forth. When less than a month later, COVID struck and things went into a tailspin for the next few months. We all know that. Nobody could predict, nobody could see COVID coming. That is risk. You may plan, you may create risk mitigation for a variety of different things. But even beyond all that, there will be something that will come and hit you which you have not planned for. How are you going to take care of this? Morgan says, get into a mindset of not trying to predict, but get into a mindset of being prepared. Prepared is better than prediction. So if you're trying to predict, you are going to be wrong, because at the end of doing everything else, there'll still be one thing that will come and hit you. Whereas he says, be prepared for any eventuality, and that way you will overcome any odds that you come, and you don't need to waste time trying to predict the next big catastrophe. These are 4 stories that I've tried to talk to you, but there is a bunch of wisdom in these 23 stories. So now who should be reading this? Ideally, since he's a finance guy, I would recommend if you're somebody who has interest in money and interest in stuff, you'll find this a very interesting read. But if you're somebody who is not wanting to read for money or for investing purposes, but just for everyday life, I still believe this book has nuggets of wisdom that will help you. So go forth, grab this book, same as ever. Believe me, you won't regret.